Hello, welcome again to Sport Unlocked. At the end of the week, a new boss of world sport was elected. Or is Kirsty Coventry the most powerful person now in sport, having been elected IOC president? To discuss it all, as ever, Tariq Panja from the New York Times, Martyn Ziegler from the Times, and myself, Rob Harris from Sky News. And both Tariq and myself were in Greece for the IOC election.
Guys, yes, you were in the land of the infinity pool, from what I could work out.
Yes, it was remarkable. You know,
We were in no pool.
We were in the land of the infinity pools, though. I think you're right to say, Martyn. The largesse on show for the IOC and the IOC members. Number of infinity pools, 131. Age of the IOC, 131. So perhaps quite apt. There was 100. We were at the. Well, we weren't. They were at the Romanos Resort, a luxury resort in Costa Navarino, Greece, and it was kind of a fairly isolated place. It was a bit of a drive from Athens,
about 3.5 hours.
Yeah, kind of off. So it was almost just all for them, and a little curiosity as well. It was so much for them. Christopher Nolan, the film director, is filming The Odyssey there. The film includes Matt Damon, Anne Hathaway. There was some helicopter pilots that were required for this film, and unfortunately for them, or fortunately for them, because they got 10 days off, while the IOC was there, those helicopters were told they couldn't go up into the air to do their work. That's how, I guess, powerful the IOC is at times.
Just in case from the air they could see through into the meeting holding the election.
The secret election.
That just illustrates, doesn't it, that this IOC is this private members club of royalty, some sports administrators, some national government figures. So obviously they think their security is in peril and they need protecting at all times.
It didn't feel that intense once you were inside the whole complex. And something we have discussed many times on the pod about how accessible the people are at the top of sport. Well, Thomas Bach did 2 pressers and 1 stand-up presser as well, didn't he, during the week?
He did. There was the press conferences were there, and because of the way the resort functioned, you could, they wanted to do mixed zones to talk to the members, but the place was so large that, if you bumped into a member and they're willing to talk, you might be able to have a chat with them. And, Zeke, one of the things you said there, this is a private members club. One of the guys did actually say this to me. This guy, one of the longest serving IOC members, Saeed Shahid Ali from Pakistan. I said, what do you think of this election, the process? I don't like it. I was like, oh, wow, what's happened? He said, no, I don't like it at all. There should be no campaigning. There should be no manifestos. And this is his quote. And I kid you not, look, we're just like a gentleman's club. And in gentleman's club, we're all friends. You all know each other. This type of campaigning and telling people what you stand for, it shows that we're not friends and we don't like each other. We should just have a vote, like any other gentleman's club.
Have it all behind the scenes.
Correct.
Well, a gentleman's club no longer, because Kirsty Coventry, the Zimbabwe sports minister, won the election and won it handsomely, didn't she? 49 votes to win by a landslide in the first round.
One vote, just enough to avoid it going into a second round, so just getting over 50%.
Yeah, it was quite an incredible moment as well because of this months-long build-up. Then the process starts, and they were using electronic voting device, and there was a bit of panic at the start because the Afghan delegate, her machine didn't work. So the Christophe de Kepper, the IOC general director who's running the election, he was like, we're all our nerves are frayed here. Anyway, they fixed her device, and bang, one of the scrutinizers walks over, gives Thomas Bach, the outgoing IOC president, a piece of paper, and he says there was a result where we were. There was like gasps, I mean, people did say if there is a first round victory, it could be Kirsty Coventry because the way that people were thinking about second and third round voting, should it have gone there? But still, it just happened so fast that the button was pressed, and within a few minutes, in fact, Morinawi Watanabe, friend of the pod, he said to me afterwards, 8 years and done in 2 minutes.
Did he want a 24-hour election?
He's the man, yes. the man of the 24-hour Olympics, 5-continent Olympics, and perhaps a 24-hour election as well, Rob. Yeah, just was a stunning, quick ending.
I think you're right to point out it was so close to getting to a second round. And what would have happened then would maybe Juan Antonio Samaranch Jr. have picked up some more second votes, perhaps, and made more of a challenge.
What did he
But
get?
I think he got 29, didn't he?
28.
But I think what it did show is actually what we should have known from the start, is that when it comes to the IOC, the establishment always wins. If you look back, the first one of these I covered, 2001, Jacques Rogge won the election. He was basically Antonio Samaranch Sr.'s preferred choice. When Thomas Bach won in 2013, he was the establishment choice, and Sheikh Ahmad from Kuwait was the sort of the kingmaker and the sort of driving force in the movement, and he won as well fairly. We knew Thomas Bach wanted Kirsty Coventry to win, and we knew that it actually been sort of fairly overtly campaigning for her, so perhaps it should have been no surprise. I think he would have been relieved she got over the line in the first round, though.
To run through the results, so there was Coventry with 49, Samaranch with 28, Co with 8, so the top three as we expected, perhaps not with the margins between them. Then Lepartien and Watanabe with 4 each, then Eliash and Prince Faisal with 2 each. We could unpick some of those results and how the other campaigns did, but this surprised the fact that the establishment got their way. Isn't this just how elections tend to work within political parties around the world as well? And, it's not necessarily underhand, but, guiding forces to ensure that continuity.
Well, it depends on the rules of the game as well, and it's unclear if the efforts Thomas Bach was making on behalf of Kirsty Coventry fall within the rules or without. There is this ethics committee there. What exactly was Thomas Bach doing, and do they fall within the rules? Same as all the others. I mean, the ethics process here. I spoke to Ban Ki-moon, the former UN Secretary General, who was ostensibly in charge of the ethics commission there at the IOC, and he said that the day before the election, he said, "Oh, we're looking at 2 complaints, two of the candidates, but the election's tomorrow," and he kind of shrugged at that. And I don't think anything is going to come from this. And Rob, you mentioned the establishment has won here, but to the outside world, it wouldn't feel like that, would it? Because you have in a sense a revolution. If you look at the profile, you've got a 41-year-old, second youngest IOC president after Baron Pierre de Coubertin, the founder of the International Olympic Committee. You have a woman for the first time, and you have someone from the African continent, the first non-European and non-American to lead the IOC. So that, to the outside world, would be seen as revolutionary in some way. So, but it is an establishment candidate, we're saying. So do you see what I mean? Do you see why people might be wondering why we were saying establishment candidate? Why is she the establishment candidate?
Well, there might have been quite a bit of shake-up within the IOC had, say, Sebastian Coe won, but you do get a sense a lot of the staff probably can stay on there. Quite aligned to Kirsty Coventry. She's been quite embedded within there for some years. But obviously, a lot of the coverage has focused on Seb Coe being pretty humiliated with 8 votes. But you could say he got his tactics very wrong. Now, last year when he announced that plan for prize money for medalists at the Olympics from athletics, he didn't know for sure that Thomas Bach was not going to seek a second term. But it just went down so badly. He seemed to get his tactics wrong, didn't he, with that, which just showed himself as a disruptor when he was already seen as such, having taken a stronger stand on Russia and on anti-doping, which of course should be very welcome. But how often do you need to sort of ease people towards decisions?
I mean, I think it was a risk, but I think he knew that he was going to be up against the establishment because, as we've said a few times on this pod, Thomas Bach and him have fallen out, and that's a big issue for Coe. So what do you do? Do you try and sort of smooth things over, or do you try and be a radical alternative in the hope of attracting support that way? So it's a risk. And it's certainly one that didn't work, but did he have any alternative?
You did get a sense around the IOC hotel that maybe it seemed just too much of a British campaign. Obviously hard to avoid his own nationality, but we do dominate the sports news conversation at times, even as Brits in the media, and some around the world perhaps don't like that scrutiny.
Now, also, it's an election, to be honest, where the public profile of the candidate really doesn't make a difference. Because if it did, Seb Coe would be a shoo-in. He was clearly, for me, the most famous of the candidates outside of the IOC ring. He also was getting all of these endorsements from athletes all over the world, celebrities. Even Manchester United wrote him a letter on the eve of the election. I don't know what difference that would have made.
But he had been working for Manchester United recently.
Yeah, after working, and to be fair to them, they do say he has worked for us, and he worked for us on this stadium committee. So we've seen him up close, but it doesn't make any difference really to the voters, the public profile. And one thing during this process, just towards the end, I found out that he was getting advice, at least when it came to his manifesto, and you talk to others perhaps in more deeper sense close to the election, from a company run by Andy Coulson, who was a very controversial figure here in the United Kingdom because he was the former editor of the shuttered now News of the World, Britain's biggest selling newspaper. And he was jailed for 14 months as a result of this massive phone hacking scandal that brought the Rupert Murdoch-owned newspaper to an end, that closed the paper. I just think whatever benefits or whatever services that Andy Coulson, Mr. Coulson, is providing to you, maybe the taint of being associated with someone like that, so close to taking or wanting to take charge of an office like the IOC, might not be a good idea. That was surprising.
Although there is a whole wider conversation about redemption or when you can come back into society. He's suggesting Andy Coulson could never work again in any communications or media role.
Personally, if I'm trying to do a campaign, maybe where I'm trying to show, hey, I'm a great candidate for this type of office, and politicians, you kind of want to give the impression of being whiter than white, above everything. Do you want anywhere near you any type of taint like that? Probably not for that type of campaign. Ziggs, what do you reckon?
I think that's a fair point of view, Tariq, for sure. I'm also interested in, if Coe had won, I think we'd have seen sort of big reforms, perhaps to the World Anti-Doping Agency. We've seen what he's done at athletics, the way he's going to tackle the drugs in athletics. And I think WADA would have been reformed. What will happen now, Kirsty Coventry, or as Gianni Infantino called on Instagram, Kirsty Coventry? What will happen now she's won? Do you think we'll see any changes?
Well, in the interview I did with her the day after the election, when I asked her about future hosts, particularly in light of the Middle East and Africa having never hosted the Olympics, and whether she would sort of target the 2036 and 2040 games towards those continents, she did reference how she'd heard on the campaign the members want more of a say. So will she act on those concerns from recent years? The fact that there was behind the scenes deals to award Brisbane the 2032 games, to ensure there were no losers 54 and 28, so LA and Paris just split those instead rather than competing for one. So will she deliver on this, or will they eventually say, well, we can't ensure there's a contested election if everyone decides to strike their own agreements?
Yeah, and that's quite important. But one of the kind of most visible presences in Costa Navarino was the Ambani family from India. Nita Ambani, the wife of Mukesh Ambani, Asia's richest man, he was there as well in Costa Navarino. And I spoke to Nita Ambani on the way out after Kirsty Coventry had been elected, and she was gushing in this praise for a woman winning, great for womanhood, great for little girls. They now can feel they can touch the sky, quotes like that. But then also immediately said, India is ready to host the Olympics in 2036. And the IOC has been in talks with India. And there is a suggestion that they might even get fast-tracked into this type of targeted dialogue, the type of thing the members do not want. Just one quick aside on the Ambanis, the amount of bodyguards they had with them in Costa Navarino. It was almost like they're all trying to outdo each other with bodyguards as status symbols, trying to keep up with the Emir of Qatar sat behind them and the Saudis. But the Indians came with a fair few, with a large crew.
I did also ask Kirsty Coventry about India being targeted towards hosting as well. But yeah, you mentioned the security. The Emir of Qatar is someone that we didn't see, although I saw the Saudi sports minister, Princess Anne from the UK. Gianni Infantino had no big entourage around him. He's an IOC member. He did meet Jay Shah, the chairman of the International Cricket Council, and posted that on Instagram. Jay Shah being Indian, talking about how he visited India during the Cricket World Cup in 2023, aware of the passion the people have there for cricket, and talking about growing the game further. So certainly Gianni Infantino also trying to sort of tap into that growth in Indian sport too.
Well, I'm sure everybody is. Interesting that nothing seemed to affect Kirsty Coventry's chances from the issues she has in Zimbabwe. She's a sports minister there. I know she's going to resign now, but her sort of closeness to Robert Mugabe and that party, taking, I think $100,000 from Mugabe, didn't she, after she won her Olympic medal. So I think people thought that might be a problem. No problem at all.
This was something I also asked Kirsty Coventry about, those concerns about Zimbabwe now suppressing freedoms, human rights violations as well being raised. And in response, she said that she's always been a proud Zimbabwean. And she talked about when she was asked to step into the role of sports minister in 2018, she took time to consider it. And she said, I wanted to try and create change in my country. And she went on to say that she's working on strengthening piece of legislation. I've never been there before. And these are things I don't believe I would have been able to achieve on the outside.
It will require us to look closer at what's happened in Zimbabwe. But look, in terms of the money for winning a gold medal, I think she wouldn't be on her own in that. Lots of countries around the world, particularly countries aren't used to winning medals, provide gifts for athletes. And more the politics is perhaps a bit more interesting. She has been in that government for 7 years, and rights groups say democracy in Zimbabwe is as bad as ever under Emerson Mnangagwa, the crocodile. And so you wonder, and in terms of policy, we're not really sure what she stands for because of all the 7 candidates, her manifesto was the thinnest. So it's a case of what's to come. The inbox there, though, is already full, starting with maybe a meeting at the White House.
Yes. When will she meet Donald Trump ahead of the 2028 LA Olympics? Of course, Trump, right at the start of his administration in January, introduced an executive order to ban trans women from women's sports. He's called on the Olympics to follow suit, threatening to deny visas to trans women heading to sporting events if they're competing in women's categories. Now, Kirsty Coventry's manifesto didn't mention this issue at all, but then later on she did talk about somehow protecting the female category in fairness, although she's not said how. And I also asked her about introducing sex testing, swab testing, which World Athletics are now looking at. It was removed from the Olympics in the last century because it's not just about trans athletes, it's about athletes with differences of sex development as well. So quite a complex area, but certainly something that will surely come up in conversation with Donald Trump, who she said in response to your question, she's used to dealing with difficult men.
You're going to have to, at some point, go to the White House and deal with Donald Trump in this moment where a lot of the world is uncertain about how America is acting. A lot of people in the world are uncertain whether they can even get into the United States. Now, with the Los Angeles Olympics, what is your message to the world? Is it a safe place for people all over the world to get into? And what will you tell Donald Trump?
When it comes to the USA and LA, I have been dealing with, let's say, difficult men in high positions since I was 20 years old. And first and foremost, what I have learned is that communication will be key. That is something that will happen early on. And my firm belief is that President Trump is a huge lover of sports. He will want these games to be significant. He will want them to be a success. And we will not waver from our values and our values of solidarity and ensuring every athlete that qualifies for the Olympic Games has the possibility to attend the Olympic Games and be safe during the Olympic Games.
This issue does come up a lot, but Donald Trump has said transgender women should be banned from women's sport at the Olympics. Will you comply with him, or are you willing to stand up to him and say you won't be ordered around?
I think there's a number of different challenges that we're going to face as the Olympic movement, and we're going to tackle those together. So in terms of Donald Trump, again, it's going to take communication. As I just said, we're going to create a task force that's going to look at the transgender issue and the protection of the female category. And once we've made the decision collectively as the IOC with the international federations, that decision will be made very clear, and we won't move from that decision.
To her credit, in the interviews in the run-up to the election, I thought she was quite bland, but I thought she did quite a good job straight after her victory there. That answer and a couple of others, I thought she was quite good. Might give the IOC press officers a bit more work with some of those comments.
I think it was quite a delicate balancing act. She didn't manage to necessarily offend Donald Trump, but she managed to say something that was responding to the question and acknowledging the sort of the broader environment in terms of dealing with someone who commented a lot during the Paris Olympics, criticising the opening ceremony, that depiction of the Last Supper.
Yeah, I wondered if it'd be surprising if she hadn't been prepared for that question and had that ready up her sleeve, because it was quite a good one.
The other big issue for her to handle will be whether Russia returns to the Olympics. And she actually gave a very direct answer. Maybe we're not used to this from sports administrators. When I interviewed her for Sky on Friday, I asked her if she wants to see an end to banning countries over conflicts. And she said yes, and talked about starting a task force to look at Russia's potential return.
But just be clear, Russia are not banned for starting a conflict. And this is where people get confused. Same with when people say Russia are banned from football and why. People are very confused. Russia are banned, or the Russian Olympic Committee is banned. Russia are not banned. Russia's Olympic Committee is banned. And why? Because they have taken 3 regions from Ukraine and turned their sports authorities into a part of the Russian Olympic Committee. And that goes against the Olympic Charter. The IOC didn't immediately ban the Russian Olympic. It was only because of that. Now, let's see what happens next.
Also an issue about breaching the Olympic truce. I can't remember, but
they seem to evolve no reason.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, and Kirsty Coventry did reference the conflicts in Africa. We've talked about Zimbabwe in recent episodes, so people could mount cases for various other countries to be banned as well from the Olympics if we were discussing sort of aggressive territorial moves by certain countries.
Well, there are, of course, and we know there are in football as well. There are here. Look, the issue isn't going to go away, and we're going to see the reality here is perhaps where the rest of the world leads, the IOC will go in that direction. Now, if there is peace in Russia, with Russia and Ukraine, Russia are going to be, one would have thought, welcomed into the IOC. In fact, the Russian delegate Tartashov was in Costa Romano. There was a Russian presence at the IOC meeting here. Don't know if they had a vote, but there was a Russian presence there. And it wasn't someone who was being shunned.
So the question we started with at the top of the pod, is Kirsty Coventry now the most powerful person in sport? Is it Gianni Infantino as FIFA president? Is it the NFL commissioner, or is it just too hard to determine? Depends which week and which story we're covering.
I think globally and across lots of different sports, and obviously she is, because it's all those different Olympic sports and the sort of associated sports as well, who are hoping to get Olympic status. Then she clearly is the most influential. But in terms of I still think FIFA, because it's such a sort of global, powerful game, actually has a at least equal, if not greater, presence in terms of sporting power.
Also, it depends how she actually takes on the office, and whether She does say, all right, thank you, Thomas Bach, for getting me elected, but now it's my show. I'm steering the ship. And here it goes. Just a quick aside, a Russian colleague who was there from TASS, I was coming back to Athens with him, and I said, well, what did you write in your piece? And he said that I wrote the following sentence. Thomas Bach has delayed his retirement. That will be interesting. I'm sure Kirsty Coventry won't like that, but if people are thinking this, people are writing it, it's up to her to make the office her own. I'm keen to see how it.
And partly on the mind is whether some of the scrutiny might appear sexist in some way, that she couldn't win in her own right. She isn't leading in her own right. She's just been guided by Thomas Bach and she owes it all to him rather than her own campaign, her own journey from being a swimming champion at the Olympics, going on to forge a political career as well, both in sport and national politics.
If you look back to how she got into the IOC Athletes Commission in the first place in 2012, I mean, there's a whole sort of interesting shenanigans that went on at that time. She certainly has been a sort of deeply political figure for quite some time.
It's incredible. I'd forgotten about it. It's worth Googling, and we don't want to labour on it too much. But the words you might want to do are lollipops, Kirsty Coventry, Athletes Commission, go fill your boots. Because if this did not happen, Kirsty Coventry almost certainly would not be the IOC president today. It's funny. A butterfly flaps its wings in the Amazon, or someone licks a lollipop at London 2012, and Kirsty Coventry becomes the IOC president in 2025. It's worth having a look at this.
The intrigue around sports politics. Sport and politics rarely separated, and we saw the Club World Cup delivered to the White House a few weeks ago by Gianni Infantino. It's still in the Oval Office. It was there when Donald Trump was announcing the new fighter jets being made, the F-47, which he denied was named after him being the 47th president of the United States. But there was the Club World Cup on the Resolute desk.
It took up a lot of room as well. Look, if you look at that picture, that trophy, it's enormous. And yeah, Rob, absolutely. And news from FIFA as well this week.
Yes, uncertainty about who one of the entrants will be at the Club World Cup now, because FIFA have kicked out one of the Mexican teams, Club Leon.
Yeah, the multi-club ownership rules for the Club World Cup, they're pretty black and white. So I think there's a lot of amazement, really, when Leon was included in the first place, because it seemed to everybody to be a clear breach of those multi-club ownership rules, and so perhaps not surprisingly, they've now been told that they can't take part.
And this is not the end of this. I'm sure Leon, who've already criticised this, are going to go to the Court of Arbitration for Sport. But the worrying thing is tickets have been sold. Leon are in a group that includes Flamengo, I believe, of Brazil, Esperance.
Chelsea.
Now, these tickets have been sold. It's going to go to CAS. It's so close to the tournament itself. This is a huge problem. One would have wondered why this was not sorted out before the draw was made was it last December?
Yeah, because it was raised then, and this was obviously a decision by the FIFA appeal committee after the complaints were lodged. It might have been helpful for FIFA if they hadn't done one on ticket sales, given the fact the Leon fans can prove they bought them, maybe even book their travel already to the US. Is this the end of the matter? Who replaces them? LA Galaxy as the North American champions, having won the MLS Cup rather than Inter Miami, who qualified by effectively winning the regular season. And although there might be claims from elsewhere in CONCACAF too.
Yeah, it's a terrible mess now for FIFA, and they really should have sorted this out before the draw.
If only they could probably find a way of getting the likes of Barcelona, Manchester United, Liverpool in. Not that it's European-centric, but it certainly helped them on the ratings around the world and the interest.
But I would, just to give credit, I know the decision has come so late, but the easier thing to do is to sit on your hands, pretend that it's all fine. Because we've criticised FIFA when they shoehorned into Miami in somehow, because that was really advantageous to them. To me, this doesn't feel very advantageous to FIFA. It's brought a lot of bad press here. It's brought a degree of litigation, I'm sure, here. But I guess they have the rules on multi-club ownership. And it's a point of difference, I think, from I think what UEFA have done as well, where UEFA have somehow managed to find all sorts of accommodations for teams in the European club competition. There's not been one that's been kind of forced to leave. And there's so many now in European football. I'm sure the rules are going to have to change, perhaps at FIFA as well, because this whole situation is so large now.
The least problematic way would have been just to cover it up. Some might accuse FIFA of acting like that to make life smoother for themselves, but they've taken a tough choice. They have kicked them out and created all this disruption just less than 3 months before their flagship new Club World Cup begins.
Yeah, and you would have thought the only issue is this should have been done a lot earlier. And look, there is a degree, Rob, more kind of negativity and kind of inevitable, sadly inevitable negativity towards FIFA and its World Cup and its tournaments. Gianni Infantino, the other group I saw him with in Costa Navarino, he was with the Saudi sports minister. He had lunch with the Saudi delegation there. I'm sure they talked about a lot of things, but I doubt the thing they talked about, and one that they must address is we've had the first death of a migrant worker building a Saudi World Cup football stadium. This was a Pakistani man called Mohammed Arshad. He fell to his death from an upper level building an Aramco stadium in the eastern city of Khobar, Al Khobar, on the 12th of March. You know, you hope this will be the very last and only one, and it's harrowing, but you just get a sense it won't be.
We'll wait to see if we get fuller details, if there's an investigation into the cause of the death. Not the first death on a World Cup stadium in recent times, not just in Qatar, but even in the United States, the SoFi Stadium in California in 2020. An iron worker died after falling from the roof of that stadium. That's going to be hosting World Cup games next year.
Yeah, and in the Saudi case, just 3 months after Saudi Arabia were awarded the World Cup, and this is where Amnesty International at the time they said migrant workers will face exploitation and many will die. We unfortunately saw this at a very large scale in Qatar. We're going to have to see what the mitigation is. They've talked about it for Saudi Arabia, but the realities are there's going to be millions of migrant workers in Saudi Arabia, thousands of them working on World Cup related projects, and it's up to the Saudi authorities and FIFA to create an environment that is as safe as possible, given what we have learned in Qatar.
And so much to build in Saudi Arabia to build up to that World Cup in 2034, but the agenda really dominated by Trump and the build-up to the North American World Cup and his various threats against the neighbours, Canada and Mexico, who are hosting with them. A week dominated for us by the IOC, but one notable bit of tennis news that might not have got full attention, which is a huge civil war breaking out between the players and the governing bodies.
Yeah, this is the Professional Tennis Players Union, which has Novak Djokovic, no less, as one of its leaders. It is seeking a court order to prevent the ATP engaging in improper, coercive or threatening communications with players. They have also filed suits in the European Union, in the United States, in the UK, over what they say is the exploitation of players and the financial distribution of tennis's riches, not to the players, but to tournament organizers. This could be really interesting, and it follows these lawsuits we're seeing, very high-profile ones in football as well. It feels like now we're in this era of litigation to change how we administer sport, really.
And unlike particularly in US sport, there are no collective bargaining agreements between the players and the unions and the teams. There's no full union as well across tennis. And yet the players are all powerful. They've got a voice. They will use that voice as well. And they'll want to be well rewarded. For so much of tennis, it's that struggle lower down in the Challenger Series, the players who are really struggling to even just fund their trips around the world.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, if you're in the top 50, you're having a good life. 50 to 100, you might be able to scratch a living, and then underneath that, you are really struggling. But here, that what they've said is that these tennis governing bodies effectively are running a cartel. We kind of heard that with the European Super League case against UEFA in a way. What they're alleging is that these governing bodies have systematically kind of suppressed the competition. They've manipulated the prize money. And the ranking system is so restrictive that the players have to play in the tournaments that they want them to. they can't find alternative areas to earn money because they need these points to play in these tournaments. So it's in a sense fixed. I think this is going to be, if you look at the way the rulings have dropped, certainly in Europe from the European Court of Justice, I think they might have a good chance here.
The filing pointing out that the four slams generated over $1.5 billion collectively in 2024, and they only paid out 10 to 20% of that revenue to the players.
Right, and they made that comparison to other sports where the players earn a significantly higher percentage of the take.
FIFA saying with that $1 billion of income into the Club World Cup, it's all being redistributed.
To the clubs, not necessarily to the players, though, in that sense. So, yeah. I've not really... This was surprising to me. Again, people who follow the pod would know we're not close observers of the world of tennis, but there are striking similarities to this and what we've seen in football, for sure.
What would stop someone setting up a completely new Grand Slam or a whole series of slams? Obviously, it's all interconnected with the rankings and all those feeder tournaments as well that don't make the money and the sport has to sustain.
Yeah, and that's their point, Rob. Exactly, but we'll see. With these cases, it could be years before we get to a conclusion. But maybe they'll get round a table and figure it out before it gets to an end point.
Well, of all things, Martyn had to leave us slightly early because he's at a tennis club as we record.
Yeah, Martyn and his burgeoning paddle career. Not even the pod can stop that. But good luck to him.
It was something I asked Kirsty Coventry in our interview, whether or not she needed to bring in new sports to embrace young audiences, and particularly citing paddle, having seen a paddle court at the resort that the IOC were using, but she sidestepped it more about looking more generally about which sports might be needed.
Yeah, it's the paddle court wasn't being particularly well used there. The golf carts were, I noticed.
Yeah, and absolutely no esports around anywhere, even though the next big IOC thing is the esports Olympics in Saudi Arabia eventually. But you wouldn't have had any sort of sight of any gaming going on or anything beyond the more traditional world of the Olympic movement.
No, not there. And, as the world changes, Rob, big news as well. One of the, I guess, heavyweight figures in sport has moved on.
Yeah, the death of former Olympic champion George Foreman, won at the 1968 Mexico Olympics, then went on to have one of the great boxing careers, the Rumble in the Jungle fight against Muhammad Ali, so surprisingly beaten by him, but so iconic a fight to this day, resonating all around the world. In fact, I record to you from Athens, and I actually was just looking up while covering George Foreman's death from here. There's a Rumble in the Jungle bar in Athens, and I did drop into it. There's not much memorabilia there. I had higher expectations, but the placemats are copies of the ticket. They've got pictures on the wall, but they're not showing the fight in the bar continuously.
No. I mean, he was obviously the other part in that enormous night there in Kinshasa, 1974, was it, Rob? Just a huge moment in sport. And my own little anecdote about George Foreman, I was a very young reporter at the Manchester Evening News and was told you have to interview George Foreman. And I was quite intimidated, quite excited, but he was such a friendly guy. But the thing that he really wanted to talk about that day wasn't his boxing exploits. It was his grill, the lean, mean George Foreman grill. Is what he made a kind of a second career, second income from that. He had a business partner who built the actual grill and all the rest of it. But he was the front man for this thing. And I'm looking at right now a signed George Foreman postcard with him leaning over his grill. So remembered in different ways by many people. An incredible athlete, though.
And really ushering in a new era of celebrity endorsements, probably alongside the sort of the Jordan Nikes.
Yeah. I mean, that for a lot of people, that is the guy. And again, like you say, a new era of sports marketing in some senses, certainly with that type of product that he was hawking at the time.
Yeah, what a career with many different chapters, and what a week with a new era ushered in world sport with Kirsty Coventry, the new name to get used to as IOC president. As ever, if you message us at Sport Unlocked on X, Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, TikTok, we'll endeavour to get back to you. Email us sportonnotpod@gmail.com. But for now, thank you for listening. Goodbye.